Calling to order the Public Infrastructure and Utilities Committee meeting. It is Wednesday, February 28th, 2024 at 3:34 p.m. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Alderman Vollmer, Alderwoman Keys, Alderman Browning,
Present.
Alderman Aldridge,
Present.
Vice Chair Schweitzer.
Chair Schweitzer, present.
We have three people. We have a quorum.
Thank you. We have established a quorum, so now we're going to move on to item number 3, approval of the minutes. I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of Wednesday, February 21st, 2024.
So moved.
Second.
Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Alderman Vollmer, Alderwoman Keys, Alderman Browning,
Aye.
Alderman Aldridge,
Aye.
Chair Schweitzer,
Aye.
Alderman Vollmer, Alderwoman Keys. We have 4 aye votes.
We have 4 aye votes?
I'm sorry, 3.
Okay. We have, by your vote, we have sustained the motion of the Alderman from the 9th and approved the minutes of Wednesday, February 1st, 2024. Madam Clerk, can you fix this sound issue we're having? Thank you. We will move on to board bills for review. I am floating in this picture. Fantastic. Okay. I can't. We will move on to item number 1, board bill number 105, introduced by Alderman Cone. Alderman Cone, you are recognized on board bill 105.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just as a matter of protocol, I would just like to remind folks that are joining us as they're walking in, if you're here to speak in favor of Board Bill 105 or 106, there's sign-in sheets over by the clerk, and you can register over there in case you want to speak in favor or opposition to either one of these board bills. I want to thank members of the committee for their time today. I don't know why this is in the way here, but Board Bills 105 and 106 were introduced earlier this session in September, roughly about 5 months ago. And 105 has to pertain to the implementation or enablement for automated camera enforcement in the city of St. Louis. And then 106, and if it's okay with you, Madam Chair, I'd like to at least speak to them together since we're not planning on taking a vote today.
Thank you. That's fine.
Is that okay? So Board Bill 106 is a companion bill that establishes the Neighborhood Traffic Safety Improvement Fund. So some context here. The city of St. Louis at one point in time did have an automated camera enforcement, red light camera enforcement program. That was suspended after a Supreme Court ruling in 2015. The Supreme Court ruling made note that the process by which the city was issuing tickets was unconstitutional. And in the 8 years following, we have seen drastic increases in traffic fatalities. We've seen significant decreases in the number of traffic stops and traffic citations that are issued by the police department, largely as a result of staffing issues and policy decisions in the police department. And as a result of that, we have this kind of really unsafe conditions that have been plaguing our city streets for many years now. Just looking back at some recent data, in 2021, we had roughly 178 individuals that were killed by traffic violence in the St. Louis City, St. Louis County area. 14,000 were injured that year. 2022, which was the last year that I have complete annual data, as 2023 just concluded, we had 173 individuals that were killed by traffic violence and 15,000 that were injured. And in the city of St. Louis, 40% of accidents are hit and run, which is a very large problem, obviously, for those that are seeking justice. Meanwhile, as I referenced earlier, traffic stops by the police department have gone down by almost half. They peaked somewhere in the neighborhood of 2009, around 35,000 traffic stops, with 18,000 in 2021 and around 20,000 last year. So in 2009, when we had higher enforcement rates and we also had this program in place, we had 39 traffic fatalities in the city of St. Louis. So that's a pretty significant increase, especially when you consider the population loss that the city has had at around the same time. And so as we continue to evaluate where we have resources, how we're able to deploy resources, and what tools we can add into our toolbox to address traffic safety, this is obviously something that has come up, for conversation again. And I would have been back in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, one of the alderpersons that was complaining about the constitutionality of red light cameras. I was very much opposed, diametrically opposed to red light cameras, in fact, because of the due process that was associated with the penalties that were incurred, the evaluation process, in terms of how the infrastructure was designed and built, and just the legislative process in general that was associated with them. Through Board Bill 105, I have worked with the mayor's office and the city councilor's office to try and address some of the constitutional concerns with respect to the program. And through 106, Board Bill 106, am trying to also curtail what I thought back in the day was, at least from a perception perspective, the city using these programs to enrich the city coffers. So, previously, money that was generated by the program, which, if I recall correctly, was between $1 and $2 million annually, would go directly into the General Revenue Fund. So Board Bills 105, 106 are intended to use funds collected from this to reinvest into our neighborhood infrastructure, which I think many of us on the board understand. We have very finite resources, and those limited resources.
Excuse me, Alderman Cohn, I apologize for interrupting you. I'm being told that the audio for folks watching at home is very quiet, so I want to make sure that they can hear it, and I know we are still having some sound issues here in chambers. So STLTV, Madam Clerk, do we need to take any time to fix this issue, or if you need a few minutes, I'm happy to give it to us. Do you want 5 minutes? Alderman Cohn, I apologize. I do want to make sure everyone at home can hear. This is such an important topic. So we will take a 5-minute recess to deal with the technology issues. Apologies to everyone in the room and at home for that. We'll make it an even 7 minutes, and we will convene at 3:50. Thank you so much.
Okay, there we go. Okay. No, we're good. Yes. Yes.
Thank you. We are returned from recess. Thank you so much for everyone's patience in dealing with technology. It's so important to make sure people at home can hear us and that everyone in the audience is able to hear the meeting as well, and there is not feedback happening. So thank you to STL TV folks and our clerk for getting that done. Alderman Cohn, please continue with your remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to continue. I'm not going to reiterate some of the points that I've already made, but do want to continue just kind of explaining the process and how we are where we are today. So, with respect to the data points that I talked to earlier, I started having conversations with the administration when they first came into room 200, so roughly 3 years ago, around this particular issue and how we can address it and work through the particulars with respect to automated camera enforcement. The mayor has been very clear that her administration is following what they call the 6 E's of traffic enforcement, which engineering, enforcement, education, evaluation, equity, and encouragement to create safer streets in St. Louis for the entire city. To that extent, one of the things that we discussed with respect to Board Bill 106 was including driver's education courses in the Neighborhood Traffic Safety Improvement Fund. And so partnering with SLPS and others to be able to provide driving school, driving education, which doesn't really happen any longer in St. Louis City schools and frankly schools across the state of Missouri, because the state of Missouri is not funding driver's education holistically across the board, which is ridiculous. So, we tried to compile pragmatic, realistic steps that we can take to improve the engineering, education, and evaluation processes to both the implementation of automated camera enforcement and from a revenue perspective, which is where I left off earlier, instead of that going into general revenue, creating this neighborhood traffic safety improvement fund so that the funds that are collected go directly into mitigating these issues. So whether that's infrastructure, whether that's education, et cetera, we have a direct correlation between the funds that are being generated to resources that are providing for mitigation instead of, in the past, they went to general revenue where they could be spent on any number of items that were not related to traffic safety. Board Bills 105 and 106 have, this is the first hearing for them. So I want to thank the committee for taking the opportunity this afternoon to meet. I am not planning on taking a vote on these today, as we've continued to have discussions in private with respect to the board bills. I have continued, as I'm sure many of you have, receiving feedback from the community with respect to both of the board bills. So I have been working on a committee substitute and will continue to work on finalizing a committee substitute for Board Bill 105, which is the camera enforcement bill. And there's a few amendments that I would like to make to 106 as well, taking into consideration some of the feedback that's been provided. And I'd like to share some of that with you all as well, just so that we have it on the public record in case folks plan on speaking later today. So the overall feedback has been favorable. Reinvesting in road infrastructure through the Neighborhood Traffic Safety Improvement Fund has been a very positive reception from the community, and hopefully transforming targeted areas within our city, particularly our neighborhood streets that do not see regular investment. So there would be, as part of that 6 E's, an evaluation of where there's high incident reports, high crash reports. And if those are happening on our neighborhood streets, then we can do things like install LED flashing stop signs or paint crosswalks, which we do not do on residential intersections right now, to make sure that those intersections have a higher level of visibility and improve the safety around them for the neighborhoods and individuals, and hopefully the families that call those places home. Some of the more unfavorable feedback includes things like, alderpersons, we don't have engineering backgrounds largely, some of us might, to be able to decide the configuration and implementation of street design, restricting funds to only 12 interventions that are focused on minor changes is considered problematic by some folks. But to be clear, the Neighborhood Traffic Safety Improvement Fund isn't limited to the items that are delimited in it. Those are just recommendations in terms of where those funds should be focused. And again, it's going to largely depend upon the revenue that's generated here. As I mentioned earlier, the revenue that was generated previously was between $1 and $2 million annually. When you're talking about things like infrastructure and education, those things cost a lot more than $1 million or $2 million. So we need to make sure that we're able to create legislation that enables us to do things and provides, a wide enough array of opportunity for improvements, but not limiting ourselves at the same time with respect to how we're able to make those improvements for safety on our streets. 105, some of the feedback that has been provided directly is that it hands too much control over to the police and the companies that are doing enforcement, and leaves opportunities, for oversight. I think part of this conversation that needs to be had is when this was introduced back in September, both myself and President Green were at a press conference with the mayor, and President Green and myself both have committed to making sure that this is done in tandem with another companion bill that provides for oversight, particularly as it pertains to surveillance programs. Alderman Aldridge has a Board Bill 185, which I'm co-sponsoring, that does just that. And we are looking forward to the continuing conversations around that. I believe we're hearing on it tomorrow. For those that are tuned in, please show up tomorrow as well. So hopefully we'll be able to address some of those concerns as well with respect to surveillance oversight, data integrity, data sharing, et cetera, and policies along those lines. And then some suggestions are, again, enumerating data privacy, adding the street director to the RFP. So the RFP process right now is predominantly with just BPS, the police department, et cetera. So one of the things that I'm looking at with the committee substitute is expanding the scope of the RFP panel to include the streets director. And then largely, one of the other suggestions is adding a right to audit for vendor contract language as well. So again, kind of going back to some of the process and policy oversight for these programs, which I'm largely supportive of and working on for the committee substitute. So I am actually going to turn it over because I am here today to gather input from the community and others with respect to the bill, in addition to all of the emails, phone, text messages, et cetera, that I've already received, but certainly want to provide folks the opportunity to speak in favor or opposition to it, or ask questions that we can pose at a later point in time for answers and whatnot. But with that, I know the mayor's office is here and the police chief is here, so I would like to give them the opportunity to speak on the board bills as well.
That's fine. Thank you so much. Whoever with the mayor's office or police chief would like to speak first, you are welcome to make that decision among yourselves. And thank you, Alderman Cohn. Wonderful. Thank you, Chief Tracy, for coming and being willing to speak about traffic enforcement and this bill in particular. We look forward to hearing you speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Speaking about Board Bill 105, I support the implementation of automatic traffic enforcement, and I believe the time is to act is now. When we look at traffic data from 2022, it is vehicle deaths and also injuries were pretty high in 2022, and I think it was an historic year. And if I go over some of the numbers, there were over 200 pedestrians impacted in 2022 by vehicle injuries and or deaths. And in 2022, there was 18 vehicle deaths compared to 8 in 2023, and 171 injuries dealing with a vehicle versus 210 this year. And 61 cyclists has been impacted this year versus 60 last year. 0 fatalities year 2 last year. And then when you take a look at 2 years ago in 2022, we had 78 deaths as a result of vehicles, and it was down 28 where we had 50 in 2023. Although we're down, it's still way too many. And, you know, I have the experience of coming from 3 other cities before coming here, the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department in the city of St. Louis. And in each one of those cities, we did have this type of automated traffic enforcement. And I think it made a real difference whether you're at budgeted strength or you're below budgeted strength, because I've been in both areas. Because what it does is it changes behavior. And in recent times, I've seen throughout the nation, I talked to a lot of other police chiefs in other cities. During the pandemic, during the interruptions when policing, just like every other job, interaction was limited. And that came into traffic enforcement, where we did not want to infect each other with COVID-19. So we had to limit traffic stops because we're exchanging information. And I think what led to that, led to people believe that we were not going to enforce traffic anymore. So behavior from that time started to catch on, and I believe not just here in St. Louis, but in other places I live, we saw behavior where people were not abiding by traffic signal, stop signs, and/or slowing down to the proper speed limit. And it continues today. I had to go to Chicago just the other day, there and back. And on the way up there, I was doing 65, 70 miles per hour, and I felt like I was going backwards because people were continually to speed. And there was a lot of enforcement out there with state troopers, but they couldn't pull everyone over to make sure that they can hold everybody in check. And I think that's the same thing that's happening here, and it's happening in other cities. So that we can give out 32,000 summonses, as we did last year in 2020, and we're already in the month of January, we gave well over 2,500, and I'm totaling the numbers up in February. We can continue to do law enforcement. We can continue to do traffic stops. But I think when you have people understanding that there might be technology involved that might be able to help us as a force multiplier, I think that helps change behavior. It's not going to change everyone's behavior, but then it starts limiting the amount of people that are going to speed, run stop signs, run red lights, and we limit that amount. It's less people that we have to encounter to do traffic safety and make sure that we're doing proper enforcement while we're trying to control everything else in the city and all the crimes. So these are the type of things that I think it's really important. I thought if done right and made sure all the safeguards that are in that Alderman Cohn talked about, I think it can actually be a benefit to the city and make the city safer. And and how we implement it and work through those things to follow. But I think it's a great tool, and in my experience, it has helped us out, especially when it came to vehicle deaths and injuries. Having that force multiplier, helping the police department out. It's just about changing culture, and we're going to continue to look at locations. We continue to move our traffic division around, but it's not just the traffic division that's giving out summonses as I go through it and I do the numbers. It's all police officers have a responsibility to patrol car, but depending on what they're prioritized and what they're doing at the time, we make sure that we're trying to stay vigilant on that and in certain areas where the community is asking us to be. But these cameras will help us make sure that we can put them in the proper places after we have, I think, we come to a consensus of where they're most needed with everybody involved. So with that, I would just leave it open to questions, and I thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak before you today.
Thank you, Chief Tracy. Alderman Keyes, are you here? And would you like to ask any questions?
Thank you. I am here. Finally. Yes, I don't have any questions at this time. I'd just like to thank Chief Tracy for being here and giving us some insight on this.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Aldridge, any questions for Chief Tracy? No? Okay, Alderman Browning, or Vice Chair Browning?
Thank you. And thank you, Chief Tracy, for being here today. I really appreciate it. I noticed when you first took your position, you were out in the community meeting with people. You went to, I think, like hundreds, I want to say, community meetings, and was very, very happy that you were out there listening to people and what their concerns were. And I believe you did hear over and over again that people were concerned about traffic violence in our city. I would agree with your assessment that this is not a problem isolated to our city, that this is a problem we see everywhere. And I heard you cite some statistics on citations that were handed out. I want to state for the record, I do see police out there handing out citations. But I guess my question is there a citation specifically for reckless driving, or what is the citation that would normally be handed out for different types of behavior? And what are police doing to enforce those different citations?
Yes, out of the 32,000 summons, and you're absolutely right, Alderman. Out of all the meetings that I've been to, dozens of dozens, I'm not going to give a specific number, but there's a lot. Out of the top three concerns when I go to meetings throughout everywhere in the community, I've been all over the city, all civic associations. In the top three is traffic, and it's about vehicles, and it's about reckless driving, it's about stop signs, it's about expired tags. And, if I just go to expired tags, out of our 32,000 summonses we issued last year, 7,000 of them were for expired tags. So we are addressing those. It might not seem like it because it's overwhelming what the things are happening. And there's certain things in this state where usually if you pull off a lot, whether it's a used lot or a new car lot, you pay your taxes on the vehicle and you get the hard plates. And in every other state I've been in, coming to Missouri, different rules, and people have to go to Department of Motor Vehicle to register their vehicle and pay their tax, and then you're getting these expired tags, and then I believe you get the personal property tax as well on top of that. So I think there's a lot of and others that just won't pay. But we have to stay on top of that. We have increased over the last few years. When it comes to all these, when we're at these community meetings, I am moving my traffic division around. I am putting them out, and we're doing traffic-based areas where we're concentrating and moving throughout the city several times a week, listening to the community in certain areas where we can actually supplement what the district office is doing, because they're answering 911 calls most of the day, and then going to community meetings and trying to do proactive policing. But these other supplemental units, I'm asking to go assist in different areas. And that's how we're coming with the numbers. And most of the summonses are given out by our traffic division moving throughout the city. So we are listening. We're trying to make sure that we can put these discretionary resources in those areas where the highest incidents of reckless driving are happening. But most of these things are happening as far as stop signs, running red lights, expired tags that we're pulling people over. And then there's reckless driving that's on top of that. Reckless driving is all in all encompassing at high speeds that you're watching going in and out of traffic. And then we also have things that we also got to be cognizant of. Felony fleeing. A lot of people don't stop for us. They don't yield to emergency equipment, emergency lights. And that can create a dangerous situation as well. So we balance that as well, where people will flee from us. And we've seen dangerous incidents or horrific incidents with people running from the police. So we got to balance when we're going to continue to pursue, or when we will call it off, when we can use things like license plate reader, cameras, and/or using red light cameras to make sure that they can catch that person for us, that we don't have to chase them through the community to maybe endanger their lives. And even last year, I think we had well over 800 of people that did not stop, and the number is probably greater, but those are the ones where we were able to give tickets for, that have not stopped for yield to police when we hit them with our lights and sirens.
Well, thank you. That's very helpful. You mentioned the use of cameras to track people. I want to ask a clarifying question there. Is the use of cameras primarily after the crime has been committed, and then it is rather tracking that the offender or tracking the person in order to be able to apprehend them or cite them, or is the use of cameras often preemptive in strategy?
And any surveillance, it even comes to cameras, that we have thousands of cameras out there, and we're partnered with other entities. They help us more catch a person so they don't continue to do another crime after. It's almost impossible to surveil thousands of cameras at once. And so what we do is we actually use them to make sure we can make a case against an individual that broke the law, or help us in a case, just in case of a carjacking. If we're able to get that plate and an individual right away, and we can see them on a license plate reader or another camera, or go through the red light, we can track the movements of those individuals, maybe get that description, and make sure that they're not going to carjack another person. Possibly they're armed with firearms, that they're not going to go shoot that person, take a dangerous individual off the street. So those are the type of things that we use cameras, and how important they are. And mostly with the cameras, we're using it to catch people that commit crimes. And then, obviously, if we have to look at felony fleeing, sometimes they're fleeing from a crime. They help us out. Sometimes they're throwing guns out the window. When I'm saying this, I'm going through some things I just went through this morning, that we made some very good arrests, that cameras helped us solidify and have probable cause to bring those people to justice.
Thank you. That's also helpful to understand that this is more of an effort to, after the crime is committed, to make sure we're apprehending the correct individual and holding them accountable. So I'm curious, how many officers are devoted to the traffic division on average?
To give you the exact number, I have different specialized units. We'll have mobile reserve, we have anti-crime units, we have people in traffic, we have people detailed into traffic, we have the district officers. So that number, I'd have to get back to you, and I'll get back to the chair and give you numbers. That should be in my budget numbers, but I want to be accurate with you, Alderman.
I appreciate that. On a different but related subject, you mentioned a culture change, and I agree there needs to be a culture change. The way that our residents drive on our streets can be very dangerous at times, but they aren't alone in that driving. There have been several high-profile incidents of reckless driving by police, and so while I have you in front of us today, I need to ask about specifically incidents like Bar PM, or the incident involving the sign at Westminster Presbyterian Church, where a police vehicle struck a 100-year-old church sign, and then the officers covered up that they had done that and proceeded to leave the scene, and it took a lot of tracking down to figure out what had happened. I think it's important that our police exemplify the behavior that we expect the rest of our drivers to emulate. So I'm curious, what is being done to ensure that our police are driving responsibly, and what accountability is there when incidents like Westminster Presbyterian Church?
Well, I'll get into both those cases for you, but I want to be very careful here. There's been no cover-up. You used the word cover-up, Alderman, and that didn't happen. When that accident happened at the church, an accident report was taken immediately, and it's posted on that date. And then when we go back, we tried to find the property owner, and that took a couple days to do. And then there's a process through whether it's a police car, whether it's a fire truck, whether it's a refuge truck, whether it's a car that I drive. If we get into an accident and there's property damage and where they need to be reimbursed, it also goes through a different process within the city government. So we're in it in the beginning, and we might be the person that caused it. There was no cover-up in that. And I want to make that clear, because that seems to be the narrative that's out there, and it's just not true. There was no cover-up. We took that accident report on the date it happened, so how can there be a cover-up on that? And then we tried to make sure that we got in touch with the owner, and it took a few days to get to that. So I want that on the record, because in all fairness, there was no cover-up. And we can go back and show those things. When it comes to how we drive our vehicles and what we do, we're going to make mistakes. We're human. We're human. We train our officers as best as possible. I've been trained in that 40 hours back 40 years ago. But the accidents are not new when it comes to policing, especially the cities that I've been in. And they're going to continue to happen, but we're going to try to do everything to minimize those things. There was an accident that happened at a Bar PM, unintentional. I'm not going to relitigate that. I've spoken about it in the press, that it's really not fair to go through this. I think I'm on the record talking about that. And it was an accident. And you know what? A place was damaged. That's not something that we want to do. And there was actually remorse by the person that actually did the officer. But that officer is going to be held accountable. And then there's other things afterwards, but we're staying with accidents right now and where that happened. And that also, he talked about being inattentive, and immediately, within 17 minutes, he told his supervisor on a body-worn camera that he looked down. Whatever the story is out before that, it was said, the official statement within minutes, that officer said, I looked down, I was not paying attention, I recorrected, and I went to a bar. Nobody runs into a bar at 25 miles per hour. That car was going 40. Airbags hit you in the face. Nobody wants to do that purposely. If you've ever been hit with an airbag, that's going to hurt you. That's going to cause damage. I'm surprised those officers were able to walk away with minimal injuries on that. So I just want to make that clear. But we are accountable to that. And then the things get puts in the process, and there's other things that happen we all know about. When it comes to the Westminster, absolutely. We take accident reports. We make sure that we do, and we average about 135 accidents a year. And that can be from someone backing into our car, we're backing, minor injuries, right up to incidents where we saw some of these incidents that we're talking about, up to where an officer's car was flipped over. That was also shown after that. Thank God these officers are all right. It's not intentional. We're going to keep training them, and I'm looking at how we train our officers. And one of the things coming out with these new Tahoes, we've been doing a lot of training on the Impalas. So I'm asking, they're not used to getting into a bigger car. And that's some of the things coming as an outsider, trying to figure out how these officers are being trained And then how are they being retrained when they get accidents? And we have an accident review board that meets every month. And right up to discipline, to maybe re-education, retraining, depending on the severity and how many accidents they have. We take this very seriously because that puts cars out of service. It costs the city money. And then we want to make sure that that they're keeping their life safe and other people's life safe. So it is something that we take very seriously. But accidents have happened prior to this year. And unfortunately, we're going to have, and hopefully they're just minor accidents moving forward. And we're going to keep impressing on our officers to make sure that we train them as best as possible and they're following through with our policy. And if they're not, we take appropriate action.
Thank you for that answer. And I understand, I mean, we know our officers put hundreds of thousands of miles in every year driving around our streets, and accidents do happen. But as I mentioned, I think it's important that we hold people to a high standard. And I appreciate hearing some of the protocols that you have in order to make sure that we are driving responsibly and not adding to the reckless violence that's out there. So I do appreciate that. At this time, that's the end of my questions. I do, again, and thank you for coming here today.
Alderman, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Tracy. Alderman Browning asked a lot of the questions about traffic enforcement that I had on my list. The one thing that I think that I'd still like a little bit more information on is this is looked at as sort of another way to manage traffic enforcement. You have police officer direct engagement with citizens and traffic stops, and then the automated component. What do you see as sort of the balance there between officers and human police officers making these stops and an automated system?
Well, it depends on how many cameras we're willing to put out there and what intersections and how we prioritize where we need them. And I think that's going to be a public session on where the public has an appetite for that. Everywhere I've been in the city, I think everybody's going to be asking for it because that's one of the top 3 concerns in every community I've been in. So I think we have to talk about how many we want, where we want them, and to make sure that we're monitoring, we're doing the audits on the vendors. We got to make sure we're doing that. And then looking at the results of what's happening with them. I think we continue to do the same amount, and if not, continue to be vigilant. We don't want either or. They're not mutually exclusive, but you want to make sure that the amount we're doing, I think we need to continue to do that. And with the help of the cameras, because the 32,000 summonses we're having, we're still seeing reckless driving, right? So why not continue doing what we're doing with the help of that? Maybe we can bring it down. And if I can give you an example, and in the last city that I was in, I have 5 children, and a few of them drive, and some of them live in my household. And they've made right on reds in my last city, and I was getting that summons because that car was registered to me, and they were the driver. After dealing with that, their behavior changed. And I'm hoping that's going to help out with a good volume of people where they know there's going to be somewhat of a consequence, and then that'll limit the amount of people that are going to be driving recklessly, and then we don't have to give out as many summonses then. I'd rather not. I'd rather everybody start to conform, because the less interactions we have to do with reckless driving or giving summonses out, the more we can do things with violent crime or proactive policing or community meetings. So I would rather be at 0, but I don't think we're nowhere near that point, especially the way behavior has been in the last few years throughout the United States. So I think we're going to need to continue to do the same amount as much as we can without sacrificing other areas of public safety. And I think these cameras will help us get there.
Thank you. The numbers that you gave at the beginning of your presentation are very staggering, with the number of people in our city who've been killed by cars, by drivers of these cars. And one of the things that I feel like we do in the city of St. Louis is we divide violent crime from traffic violence. And I think of traffic violence as violent crime. It might not be a gun involved or person-on-person physical altercation, but it is a violent crime that's being committed when someone is hit on our streets or killed or hurt. And I think that mindset really needs to change because it is resulting in the death of our community members, and that's unacceptable. The things that I hear from constituents on this bill in particular is, the previous experience with traffic enforcement, automated traffic enforcement, and how it went in St. Louis being unconstitutional. This might be a better question for Alderman Cohn or Ms. Milberg. And that is something they're concerned about with if this is going to work. It worked last time, but it didn't ended up staying. And then we have the same problems now that we did before. And a lot of folks ask me, they just want more police officers doing traffic enforcement. And then some folks are the exact opposite, and they want less interactions with police officers and the community. And, somewhere in there is the answer. And I think it's so important for us to figure out what that answer is with the mindset of, this is about preventing loss of life on our streets. And that is so crucially important. And so, the question I asked about if the enforcement of traffic laws will change if we have automated traffic enforcement, I think one of the things that you mentioned was the temp tags and how that will work with if someone is going through a red light at 70 miles per hour and they don't have a license plate on their car. A police officer might be able to pull them over, but how would that work with the camera? Maybe again, that's a question for Alderman Cohn or Policy Director Milberg. But I think that consideration is something that we're not quite clear on in my community, at least.
Well, I'm going to answer one question. You made a really good point, Alderwoman. You talked about how important this is, and because this results in serious physical injury, as we've seen recently, and a horrific incident that happened on Olive Street. We leverage these major crimes and how we're able to reduce it by using technology. And, we use NIBIN, we use ShotSpotter, we use license plate readers, cameras. We use these things and we use them protecting people's civil liberties, and we go ahead and use them in a proper way with safeguards that are in place. But looking at these things, picking up shell casings and how seriously we deal with that, how we're making a lot of our success. There's good police work, there's great follow-up, great detectives, officers doing a lot of good work, working with the community. But that technology is helping us with violent crime all the way down to quality of life crimes. We don't forget about them all. We've been down all of them this year. Why aren't we leveraging technology with this as well if we think this is an important violent issue with vehicles? So I agree with you, and that's why I'm here before you today, to complement what we're already doing, to see if we can bring that down. And when it does come down, then we'll have less interaction doing vehicle stops if we can start to change the behavior, we bring it down, and there's somewhat help in the consequence. And everybody talks about, it's only the people that are law-abiding that are going to get summonses. Well, like my kids made that right on red, they stopped doing it because they're going to do it once. And then it limits the amount of people that are going to be doing, because some are just going to do it until we pull them over, and or they do it multiple times. And then those are the ones that we can make the highest propensity for reckless driving become smaller, and then we concentrate on them, and then we don't have to pull as many people over and use traffic enforcement. We're still going to need it. We're always going to maintain, but I think you hit the nail on the head. Make this just as important. That's why we need the technology to help us, because we're using technology in all these other crimes. And I'm going to hand it over.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just also wanted to follow up on that comment or question as well, Madam Chair. So from a constitutionality perspective, part of the reason the Supreme Court ruled the way that they did was from a due process perspective, the city was just issuing citations with very little due process associated with it. So, people essentially were given a fine and could, on the back of a piece of paper, send in their appeal, and it was a very cumbersome process. It wasn't very transparent. And so the way the new process will work, and this all has to be worked out through the RFP process. So in the legislation, it addresses some of those concerns in terms of the due process that would be afforded to people who are identified as offenders. And then also, just following up on one of the remarks the chief just made, and the committee substitute, I do plan on intending to introduce that this would not actually be enforceable on right-hand turns on red. I think that that's the least problematic offense that we have in the city of St. Louis. But I think oftentimes, at least with the previous program, we had people, myself included, at Grandin Delore, that would receive citations, even though there's no oncoming traffic from any of the three, other, entry points into the intersection. Dedicated right-hand turn lane, would come to a stop, not a stop for 30 seconds, but a stop for 5 seconds to be able to check all of your points of entry into the intersection, notice that no one was coming, and make a right-hand turn in that intersection and still get a citation. So those are problematic kind of policy choices that we make that we need to evaluate. But obviously something that we can continue to discuss as a legislative body in terms of what makes sense from that perspective. But I think we're trying to address some of those more due process issues from a constitutionality perspective in this legislation.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Did you want to add something? Sure.
And to be clear, that right on red was the rule in another city, not here. And I just thanks for clearing that up for one of my children. I want to out them. I have 5, so I want
You're
to out.
out. Yeah, they're watching this like, Dad. So, I think one of the things that we need to remember too is when people talk about speeding and breaking of traffic laws, this is a widespread issue. It is some very egregious offenders, but people who are getting in accidents, those people who've died on our streets, I'm sure not every single person was going 80 miles an hour on the street. Some of them were rolling through a crosswalk on their cell phone, so I think we need to remember that it's not just egregious situations that are causing egregious outcomes. It's the distracted driver. It is someone not paying attention to the stop bar. These are really important things that the St. Louis stop mentality of just kind of rolling through a stop sign. And then it comes back to, you mentioned we use technology in these other cases in other violent crimes. I don't say in violent crimes. I want our city to start saying other violent crimes when we're talking about traffic violence. We also need to think about our signals in the city of St. Louis and the technology that's possible to not have people sitting at red lights for 5 minutes with no one coming, because that encourages this bad behavior that then spreads. So there's so many ways we can use technology that is not just enforcement, and there's so many infrastructure improvements that we could make. I had not heard the ease description of what we're doing in the city of St. Louis, but I like all of those ease, and I'm looking forward to talking about them more. Alderman Aldridge, you said you now had some questions you wanted to ask?
Yes, thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Alderman, for bringing this piece of legislation together. Eventually we'll have some questions for you, but I think we can, after others speak, I can ask those. I think it's more kind of part of the process, and I know you're taking your time to make sure that this is done right, knowing that in the past the Supreme Court has said it was unconstitutional. So how do we get to a spot where it will hopefully pass legal muster? But thank you, Chief, for being here today. I have some questions, a little bit of follow-up of questions that was already asked, and maybe you said it, but I just want to make sure I was clear. So when it comes to your traffic enforcement division, how do you go about deciding, and I know you're going to get those numbers to us, which will be good as we move forward on this decision. How do you go about deciding where those division officers go each day? Is it the intersections that are most deadly? Is it community input? I'm just curious of how do you make that process?
A combination of all the things you talked about, Alderman. And another thing is they also have to take care of accidents, serious accidents on the highway. So if they're not drawn out by an accident, they're going to be responding. If they're doing areas that they're doing traffic enforcement, they do the highways, they do the speeding on the highways, and they do actually serious injury and death, and they do the accident reconstruction when there's a death, because they're very well trained, and we send them to schools to make sure that they're doing the proper investigation. Where we put them, all those community meetings we talk about, I want Major Marisi, I want his people, I want Lieutenant Paul Lauer, I want them invested with the district commanders and also listen to the community meeting, because at each one of these community meetings, when we can get to those communities to enhance the work what the district office is doing, we will put them out at locations that they're concerned about. We've got very positive feedback on that. Then we also take a look at some of the areas, the high accident-prone areas that we're seeing more vehicle accidents that are happening. What is happening at those sites? And then we do a combination of all of them. There's a plan going out each day, but there's so much happening throughout the city. We try to prioritize. We try to move them around. We might want to make sure that no part of the city's actually gets a fair share of when we move this mobile traffic division around. And then we field our mobile services and also our anti-crime teams, mobile reserve. We move them into areas that we might have some of these similar situations on top of what the district does. So everybody's involved and everybody understands. I mean, it's on the forefront of what's happening with the media. Our officers understand. They want to keep people safe. They try to prioritize that. And I'm hoping this cameras can help us get to where we need to be, where it's a force multiplier to bring everything safer. And then I think we need a public service and announcements and continue to push the dangers of what this can happen. And, you know, we've been working also with the NAACP from the city and the county, and we've talked about pursuits and MOUs that we have. And there's an education process happening with the Urban League and trying to educate our drivers, and especially the young drivers, what can happen in the results. And I think it's self-explanatory how horrific something can happen that happened a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. I'm happy you kind of brought up that PSA because I know at least for this committee and to you and people of the general public, like traffic safety is very important. And I think sometimes as elected officials, you know, we try to figure out how do we solve the problem through legislation, as there's another piece of legislation around like reckless driving, right? Because it's just so much happening on our streets. But, you know, until we also change the culture and the mind of driving in St. Louis, no matter how many, you know, potential red light cameras are out there, you know, people are still going to drive recklessly as people still commit crimes in front of cameras, which is just bizarre to me. But to get back to the red light camera and trying to figure out to tie that to the other technologies that you have, such as like license plate readers and just general cameras on street lights. So if this red light camera would kind of be a tool to help on the back end. I know a lot of recently have come out in the news. If we had the red light cameras, a situation at the Drake concert could have been avoided. However, that was a car that was like speeding, would have sped through a red light camera. When they speed through that red light camera, is the plan to use those cameras to try to use your other technologies like license plate readers to eventually go out and tag on like an additional summons, not just running a red light, but like a speeding element to it? I'm just curious of how are you going to tie all these technologies together to kind of hold people accountable?
There's policy and process, the way I've seen it, but I don't want to get ahead of myself on this. The way I've seen it work, you're not going to go after the fact. If there's a red light and there's a red light summons, it's about the red light summons. All the other things, you're not going to be approved. It would, to be able to try to prove speed, do you have speed cameras out there? No, we have red light cameras. So looking at the speed from a camera, you know, that wouldn't hold up in court. And I think we would stay with the red light cameras. I think if we go back to the incident on Olive, I think if we had red light cameras in place, this is probably not the first time that this individual is driven recklessly. Maybe I'm speculating. I'm just going to go out on a limb. But you know, this kid didn't have, when I say kid, he's a young adult. He didn't have a criminal record, but he was driving recklessly. He was driving fast. But I think had something popped, if we had some type of, that caught them, because obviously we didn't catch them in the city before that. But if something caught them on one of the automated readers, maybe that red flag that would have went to that house and to him to say, hey, maybe your behavior now, it's being tracked. And then maybe this can save some lives in the future. That's the way I look at it, and that's why I continue to bring up that I know when there was no right on red in the city I was at. So if they made a right on at some corners, and when they did it, I know they're not doing that again because I'm not getting any of those summonses anymore. And I also know the conversation I had maybe made them have a wake-up call that this is just not the right thing. And I'm hoping that could have happened with that kid, where 2 lives could have been saved. And also, this kid's life wouldn't be ruined by reckless driving.
Do the department currently have, I guess, speed cameras?
I'm not aware of speeding or red light cameras in the county.
In the city of St. Louis?
I'm sorry?
Do the department of the city of St. Louis have speed cameras, or?
They don't.
We don't, okay.
We do not.
Okay. And I think as we're talking like about reckless driving, I do just want to bring up something, and I think you've been, if me and you've talked, you've been very always frank and honest and transparent, and go into some of the situations where we've seen several, as you say, Tahoes that have been involved in some very noticeable accidents. Are these Tahoes something that are new to the department, or have the city always had Tahoes? I know that I heard you mention that these are new, and I know you're new to the department, so maybe that's a get back. But if I'm not mistaken, I thought we had Tahoes since 2008.
Yeah, we've had Tahoes, and the other police departments I came from have had Tahoes. The officers kind of prefer them. They give them a high vantage point when you're going down a block. You're actually higher up. They're better in the snow and everything else. Why I'm trying to find out why are we having these type of accidents, whether it's more or less, and if you take a look at it, it stayed pretty much the same, our department accidents from 2022 to 2023. I said that 2023 we had 151. That's what I have on record from the Department Accident Review Board. That's an average of these numbers. I'm still making sure I get them positive correct, so approximate right now on the ones we've done reviews on. They average about 135. We've had Tahoes all those years, so why is it up now? And I had to take a look at, as I come in, I'm coming with outside eyes, a bit of a change agent, keep doing what we're doing well, which we're doing a lot of things well, and then maybe tweak things that I know are best practice if it worked in other places. One of the things I look at, what is happening? And I did look at, how are we doing our training? I looked at the 40 hours that they get them in the police academy, and then the retraining, should they get in an accident after they go before the Department of Review Board. Some of them, it's not their fault. They're stopped at a red light and a car runs in the back of them. That officer's still getting dinged with an accident, has to go before the Department Accident Review Board, but we find them not at fault. But we might have to, if he has another one, might send them for retraining. If it's something that is their fault, then it can lead up to discipline, and it's definitely training. Always sending them back out in the same type of vehicle. So we want to train them with all vehicles. We do have Impalas, we do have Tahoes, we do have other types of vehicles. I think we have to make more of an investment, that we should make sure that we're satisfied in how they drive a Tahoe, because it's a bigger vehicle and it's actually a little more difficult, more things to do than a smaller vehicle, maneuverability and also recorrection, that we've seen some things that have happened. And some of it is just outright the officer's at fault. At fault. A lot of times they're not. Most of these accidents they're not. And it's about retraining. And I don't want to just throw the baby out with the bathwater and say get rid of all the Tahoes. I think they're very good tactically, and I think they're good for a vantage point to see crime and be able to see a block for situation awareness. But we got to figure out what we're doing, and then we take this seriously. And our review board even has an officer of equal rank that sometimes is finding another officer at fault. So it's not just supervisors and above, but we have a very eclectic group of diversity of thought and rank to make sure that we're reviewing it. And we're very critical of each other internally. And that training is one of the things I want to make sure, if we're not doing it, let's make sure we are. And I don't think that Tahoes should be something we get rid of. I don't want to do a knee-jerk reaction, because we've had them a lot of years and we still average 135 accidents. We're only a little bit above that. So how can we improve on this? I know there's been high-profile incidents as of late that may have brought this to the forefront. Let me figure, if this is coming to the forefront, me as the CEO of the company, let's figure out how we can improve on that. And I'm not saying we don't make mistakes, we're human, and we have. And I'm going to look to try to minimize that and help our officers for everybody's safety.
Thank you, that's all I got, Chief.
Thank you, Alderman.
Thank you. Ms. Milberg, did you want to speak on the bill? That'd be great. Thank you, Chief Tracy. Really appreciate you being here today, answering all the questions.
Hello, for the record, my name is Casey Milberg. I am the Policy Director in Mayor Jones's office. And first of all, thank you to the committee for making time for this hearing today and force. Thank you very, very much to Alderman Cone for championing this very important legislation. I can still remember the first phone call that I got from Alderman Cone about his desire to carry this legislation. It was early last year, and I know it was before 7:30 a.m., but I don't quite know how early it was. And he said, if you guys are going to do this, I want to be the one to help you guys get this across the finish line. And I want to be the one to make sure that we get this done right. So what are you thinking? How can I help? And here we are today. After a very long year of conversations with Alderman Cone and our courts, our streets department, our St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department, our city councilor's office, others, it's been a truly collaborative effort to make sure that if we do this again, we learn from the past and we do it in the right way with a focus on protecting the lives of pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers. And to re-up some of the data that's been shared, and just to be extremely blunt about it, for 2022, there were 200 pedestrians impacted by traffic violence, 18 fatalities, 71 injuries, 60 cyclists impacted, including 2 fatalities and 48 injuries, 5,416 drivers and passengers, including 58 fatalities, 5,358 people injured. The total number of people killed on city streets in 2022 is the second highest on record, going back to 2002, with a total of 78 lives walking, biking, or driving taken by traffic violence incidents. 50% of pedestrian fatalities in the city occur in predominantly Black and minority areas of the city, and 71% of fatal car crashes in the city occurred in predominantly Black and minority areas of the city. So yes, there is a need for this legislation, and there's also a need to do it the right way. And as you mentioned, Alderwoman Schweitzer, our prior experience needs to inform our current approach to this. And I want to talk a little bit about what the city's prior experience was and how you see the lessons learned baked into the draft legislation that we worked on with Alderman Cone. So between 2010 and 2015, there were a number of court orders issued on the topic of how do you do automated traffic enforcement in a way that upholds due process, and what is it that we know that doesn't work. And here's some of the lessons that we know from case law that we have to make sure are included in this legislation that are currently included in it. First of all, this is within the city's power because state statutes give us this power for both red light violations and speeding violations to use cameras for these purposes. Next, the ordinance has to have the purpose of promoting public safety and cannot be for the purpose of raising revenue for a city. The use of this phone enforcement is specifically within the city's police power. The defendant must be the driver, and liability cannot be placed on the owner of the vehicle. The courts also tell us that the notice of violation that the driver receives has to comport with Missouri Court Rule 37, which is all about due process, and the notice that you, the individual, are afforded under due process to receive of the alleged violation, and that you have to be informed of your right to plead not guilty and go to trial. Additionally, all fines must be paid to and through the court with monies distributed by the court according to law. You cannot have an arrangement where the fines are paid to the vendor or directly to the city rather than to the court. You have to inform the defendant of the right to plead not guilty and have a trial. And the city has the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt that the person who was driving the car was driving and in fact committed the ordinance violations that they are alleged to have violated. And I want to stress that again, that burden is on the city. You cannot shift that burden of persuasion to the owner of the vehicle. You have to prove the driver was the person driving. And that's where the court said the city's prior program got into trouble the last time. The court didn't say the city can't do automated cameras. It said you're not doing the right way, due process matters. And so all of that, all of those lessons learned are baked into this bill, Board Bill 105. And to really quickly run through the sections of what's in this bill, because I heard a lot of questions about that tonight. So when you're looking at this legislation, Section 2 is your definitions. What are the rules of the road? You see the first lesson learned from the courts baked into the definition of automated camera enforcement system. That system has to comply with Missouri Supreme Court holdings saying the system's got to be able to take pictures of the driver among other pictures. When it comes to supervision of the program, because we know that this is within the city's police power specifically, you'll see in Section 4 that the St. Louis Metropolitan Police, that's why they're provided with supervision and the aspects of this program, but that they also have to coordinate with streets and other departments and divisions because that just makes sense, frankly. Why would we not do that? But for chain of custody and legal standards purposes, SLMPD has to own this, so to speak. Section 5 is where you see the specs of what we're asking our vendor to prove to us. Prove to us that you comply, not just with the standards the court has set forth and expects the city to uphold for this program, but prove to us that you can do other things too to support the implementation of this program. Tell us, what are you doing with data? Are you selling data? Is that part of your practice? So play ball with that. Your ability to help support an efficient administration of this program, your ability to comply with legal precedent. You'll also see some prohibited uses of vendors within Section 5 as well. Prohibited uses currently in the ordinance include surveillance programs or artificial intelligence systems, access to unauthorized individuals other than folks who are within the SLMPD or those who are involved in the prosecution or adjudication of alleged violations, any purpose other than the implementation and administration of the city's automated camera enforcement system, and again, the selling of images or data for anything of value. Section 6 is where we get into how are we going to identify the location of these cameras. Right now, it's currently written as SLMPD and BPS works together. The bill sponsor stated his intent earlier to broaden that up to include streets. Location selection is currently written would be based upon several factors. Data on vehicular crashes, including side impact and turning crashes, crashes involving pedestrians and cyclists, and crashes producing injuries or fatalities. Location would also be based on data on where traffic control ordinance violations occur, such as the running of red lights, vehicular crashes and speeding, traffic volume, equity and environmental factors, and community feedback as well. Section 7 implementation is where you see the bulk of the lessons learned from the court rulings built out in addition to other lessons. We know SLMPD, of course, has to supervise this program, the implementation as well, but we make sure that they work in partnership with other departments. We specify what authorized uses are. You can issue a violation using the system for alleged violations of city ordinances and state laws, and so since that's both red light running and speeding, that would be what these cameras would cover. So by way of example, if you ran a red light and you were speeding while you did it, the camera would have the ability to say, okay, you ran a red light, here's what we show, here's our documentation for you doing that, and then when your speed was also clocked at this speed. Prohibited uses are also in Section 7. Alderman Cohn did insist upon ensuring that there were prohibitions on issuing violations for legal right turns made after coming to a complete stop at an intersection. So that's there. Can't use it to go after activity protected under the First Amendment. Any violations targeting or unhoused for being unhoused, surveillance programs or artificial intelligence programs, or access to those unauthorized individuals. We also build out what's considered to be probable cause. And what that looks like is authorized employees examine the images and video collected to determine whether probable cause exists for a violation of city ordinance or state law. They can use any lawful means to identify alleged violators, and probable cause for alleged violations may exist if it is in compliance with Missouri Supreme Court Rule 37. Again, that notice that you were afforded to receive. And if the recorded images and data show the alleged violation, date and time, vehicle involved, your plate or your temp tag, the all-important face of the vehicle operator, and the traffic control signal as applicable if it's emitting a signal. Section 8 is all about what public awareness is going to happen. and that currently specifies that SLMPD and BPS work together with any other departments to develop strategies to raise public awareness of the new camera system and implement that no less than 60 days prior to the first date of cameras becoming operational. And in addition, to place signs warning of the automated camera system placements posted conspicuously in advance of those intersections. You currently see some of those if you're driving around the city. Can you hear me? Okay. The legacy systems. Section 9 is where the assessment provisions are currently built in. There's an annual assessment compiled by SLMPD pulling data provided to the DPS, Department of Public Safety Director, on the number of crashes at intersections with cameras versus at intersections without cameras, the number of violations issued at each intersection where there are cameras, and by zip code. Anonymized demographic data about violations is available, including race and residential zip code of ordinance violation recipients, information on the number of cameras of use, their location, the length of time images and data are restored and on them, and city employees authorized to access the automated camera enforcement system. And this report is also provided to the Board of Aldermen. And then after doing this annual report, SLMPD is able to assess in partnership with BPS whether to add additional or remove existing cameras. Prosecution rules are laid out in Section 10. Again, this is very based in Missouri Supreme Court Rule 37. Vehicular violation notices are only issued to individuals who authorized employees have determined were operating the vehicle at the time of the alleged violation, and violation notice must inform the recipient of their right to plead not guilty and go to trial. Section 11, revenue, as Alderman Cone has discussed, all fines must be paid to and through the courts with monies distributed according to law, so no money's going directly to the vendor. And then the money that's delivered to the city is instead currently proposed to go into the fund that Alderman Cone talked about for various traffic and transportation mobility improvements, as well as driver's education. And then sections 12 and 13 are severability and emergency clause. So all that to say that we are in the fortunate position of having been able to learn a lot of lessons that we have integrated and baked into this bill. And with that, I know that was a lot to throw at you guys, and I will happily take any questions.
Thank you. Thank you for going through the bill so thoroughly. I was just, Alderman Keys, are you still here and wanting to ask questions?
Yes, I am still here.
Did you have a question you wanted to ask to Dr. Milberg?
No, thank Ms. Milberg for going through all of that. That was quite lengthy, but I do appreciate the clarity of the statement that she's making today. I am going to have to go ahead and leave the meeting for another engagement. So you guys have a great one.
Thank you, Alderman. Thank you. Alderman Aldridge.
Thank you, Ms. Milberg, for being here and walking through legislation for us. It was lengthy, but when you give a presentation, it's always good, and appreciate you for being here today. I guess I'm just trying to figure out, I don't know if this is on the front end where we need to put this in legislation, or on the back end, or like the RFP. So to be clear, these won't just be red light cameras, these will also be traffic or speeding cameras as well, correct?
Yes, that's correct. So it currently provides, let me see if I can pull the exact language in this section. But yes, it currently provides that if you are either speeding or, so here we are. So you have to be provided notice, like if you look at section 10, which is on page 15 of your legislation. If you look at section 10, you'll see that there are specifications for the kinds of information that have to be provided for the kinds of ordinance violations that could be issued. Because state law allows for red light and speeding, that's what we baked in here. And so the burden of proof that's on the city is to show date and time of alleged red light or speed violation, time elapsed under red light, the speed that you were going. In the RFP, you can see that we baked in that information request as well as from vendors to say does your system have the ability to show both of these compliant with the standards that the Missouri Supreme Court has set forth for determining these kinds of violations?
Do we know, and not, like I said, it is just from my knowledge, is if it's on the front end or the back end, what would be I know in the past when the rear light cameras was ruled unconstitutional, ticket was $100. I'm curious, what would be the price of running a red light, and then if you're tying in the speeding, would that be SLMP, the police department policy? Like what's the fine for just running a red light, and what's the fine for speed?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because you'll see there's no fine in this legislation, right? And that's because fines are controlled by what's called the Uniform Fine Committee, which exists through the Missouri Supreme Court through state statutes. And so the Uniform Fine Schedule, it's very far away, tiny font you guys can't see, but it exists. I can send you all a link. And this Uniform Fine Committee gets together and says, okay, these are the standard fines for certain kinds of violations. Red light violations are currently governed, as with other violations, by the Uniform Fine Committee. So for red light violation, for example, right now the fine schedule provides that it's limited to $60.50 plus costs. Costs, which are court costs, as of right now are $57.50. So I believe if I'm mathing correctly, that is 117, it would be $118 total for a red light violation. And then when it comes to speeding, it's a tiered system based upon the speed that you're going. So there's no one-stop shop. But the reason that's not within this is because that's determined by the Uniform Fine Commission, which is set up by the Missouri Supreme Court.
Gotcha. And again, I'm just asking for like RFP processes before or after. So if there are not plates on a vehicle, how do you identify the car?
Sure. So within the legislation, you'll see there's the language of other lawful means, right? So think about what happens if you go to get plates for a car. You have to provide certain pieces of information to the dealership that are then transmitted to the state in order to get that temp tag, and eventually, in the hopes of getting your license, you've got, the dealership that gathers information as well to give you your temp too. So all that does live, either at the dealership or in some other aspects, the DMV, if you make it there eventually. But when it comes to information that those entities have, that's where, the other detective work that Chief Tracy was referencing can come in, which is, okay, cool. So, if we have this temp tag system, is it possible for us to, work with dealerships around the area to say, okay, do you, are you tracking these? Are we able to identify, the owner of the car that way? That is something that we've had ongoing conversations about with the SLMPD, because we know that's part of the issue. The state did pass legislation last year to try to mitigate this problem a little bit, but it's not going to start taking effective until 2026 and won't be fully rolled out for another, I think, 8 to 10 years once it goes live. So it's a multi-prong effort to investigate that, and we do need, the state to hop in and start, getting their side of this, underway. But there are going to be other, alternative sources of calling around detective work that you can track down, cars that have those temp tags as well.
And to be clear, my question was if there's no plates on the car.
Oh,
no plates.
I thought, yeah. That's a tough one for sure. If there's no plates on the car, I think that really does limit the ability to track down the owner. I don't think there's any way to pretend that's not the case.
How would, it work for the process of face recognition? So I am driving Alderwoman Schweitzer's car. It is not my car, it's her car. And I'm driving it. I've never been pulled over. I'm not in the database. How are you going to get the ticket to not Alderwoman Schweitzer, but to the actual individual who is driving the vehicle, who may not be in the police database?
Yeah, sure. So the way the legislation is currently written is that it prohibits use of facial recognition as part of artificial intelligence technologies. And so, a lot of the feedback we received was, okay, we don't want this feeding into real-time monitoring of people, right? We don't want a camera to ping somebody as they're driving through an intersection, pull that face, feed it into a system. That system starts pulling up everything that they can find on that person. So that's not contemplated by this legislation at all. I just want to be very clear about that. Law enforcement can use any, lawful means that does not involve that to identify the driver of the vehicle. So, I know that there are databases that they have access to with, driver's license information and whatnot. So one example would be, if you see a car, it's got a plate on it, and you're able to run the plates and pull the image of, the driver or the image of the owner of the driver's license, and you're able to see that image. If that's a match, then that's great. If not, you could say, okay, well, maybe this is a relative of that person. Maybe there's other ways I can look at who a relative of this person is. So, I don't know if that.
It answers. I guess it's curious of, like you say, the database, because again, if I'm a 17-year-old minor, I have my permit, I'm able to drive a car, my mom's car, and I'm driving, I have a hat on where you can't identify me. Who does that ticket go? Is the department going to spend time to investigate that individual? Will they issue a ticket out to mom saying, hey, this is your car, but...
No, that's not allowed. That's the way the old system worked, and that's why we got the court ruling that we did, because the tickets were formally issued to the driver of the vehicle. So that's not allowed. And, if it's someone who you can't tell who they are, if you can't tell who their face is, then you can't tell who that person is, and it can't be issued to the driver the owner of the car, just because you face
Gotcha.
the person driving.
That answered my question. Basically, you can't, if it's not the owner of the vehicle,
Yeah.
you cannot give the ticket to the owner.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. You can't just by default presume that it's the owner. And the other thing the court said is you can't presume that the owner gave permission to whoever it was driving to use their vehicle for speeding, which is what it would essentially mean to give a ticket to the owner even if they weren't driving, right? So that's not the way a lawful system works in this case.
Just real quick, since introducing this bill, back in September, I have had a very heightened sense of what's going on around me at intersections. And just last week, in one day, I was at intersections where people went through the red light. And I've had those same questions posed to me, Alderman, and all of them had license plates on them. Not one had a temp tag. So I think, and those are important questions that need to be asked, and I think it's, certainly welcome as part of this discussion. But I think programs like these are designed so that we're addressing, kind of a majority of the concern, and there's always going to be one-off situations where, someone's driving around in a Halloween costume and, runs it. I mean, we're not going to be able to issue. Hello? Okay. So not giving people ideas here, please don't do that. That's not safe. But I think, there are always going to be those one-off situations where there's not a license plate on the back of a vehicle. There's someone who won't be able to be identified through, the technology, the photograph that's taken. But that's also part of the due process, portion of this, that we're trying to ensure, the constitutionality of these processes and allowing people the opportunity to not be cited when we don't know for a fact whether or not they're driving, right? And so hopefully we're still able to address the pattern of behavior that happens at these intersections. And there's always going to be the people who make really poor decisions and are going to continue to do that irrespective of the technology that's available. But by and large, trying to shift a culture towards safer driving practices.
And I do want to say, Alderman Cohen, as we've talked about this, I appreciate your leadership on it and trying to be intentional to not redo a lot of our wrongs in this legislation. Some people may expect that we should have passed this a long time ago or that we stalled or something, but I know you've been very intentional of trying to make sure that it passed constitutional muster. So I appreciate that. And I just want to get those questions on the record. So for the people who may not read the bill, what does that look like if I'm not the driver in the car? And then my last question is, speaking about state and hoping that the state get their act together, I know I'm curious, and I know me and you both come from the State House, and a bill that's pertaining to the state, and there's legislation to ban these type of things. Would this, if that were to pass, would this legislation be invalid?
Well, I think that the answer to that would be it depends on what the form of the legislation takes when it crosses the finish line. My understanding is right now, the way the state legislation is worded, it squarely applies just to the red light portion and not to, the speed portion of it. But it really would depend on what the language of that bill says at the time if it would cross the finish line, if it even gets to that point.
Thank you. That's all I got for now.
Thank you, Alderman. Vice Chair Browning.
Thank you, and thank you everyone who's still here. I know this is a long meeting, but this is a really good topic, and I want to especially thank Alderman Cohen for bringing this forward, for the very thoughtful approach, and the companion bill that directs the fines and fees from this to something that's worthwhile and will help make our streets safer. I also want to call out the very intentional language that you used in the bill that I really want to thank you for, which is to say crash instead of accident, because if you're engaging in this kind of behavior, it's not an accident. You're engaging in a way that endangers people, and it is a crash. And that is what we're trying to really decrease in our city. And so this is absolutely needed. I have no additional questions, but I would like to be added as a co-sponsor to both Bill 105 and 1.
So noted.
Thank you, Vice Chair Browning. And I do appreciate the time you took to go through the bill point by point. I think so often we end up in committee hearings and we talk about the ideas or the vibes, if you will, of a piece of legislation or what you might want to be getting to. And going through point by point answered a lot of questions that I've heard community members bring up about concerns about the bill. There's never going to be a bill we hear here where every single person in the community thinks it's a fantastic bill. But what we should be discussing is what's actually in the bill, how enforcement works, what the bill's going to do, what roles people have, and so forth. So I really appreciate you taking time to go through piece by piece all of that. I am interested in a little bit more about vendor selection. In other cities in Missouri have to follow the exact same guidelines that we've been set by our courts here. Can you speak to the vendor's ability in Missouri to address all of those things and any promising examples in other communities?
Yeah, so the only other community in Missouri specifically right now that's using this system is Hannibal, Missouri. So we also, on the vendor question, we have received outreach from a number of interested vendors. Our policy has so far been look at the bill, look at what it says. We are going to, as administration, likely be moving ahead with it's called a request for information to really drill down into that as this gets moving a little bit. And the way folks can think about a request for information is it's sort of like the step before a RFP, request for proposals. And so that's one, to help just get the better sense of and, get that conversation going among prospective vendors of, hey, you're on notice. This is what we're looking for. This is what's important. This is what's going to have to be part of this legislation. What else can you do? But there have been a number of vendors who have reached out to express their interest in this so far. So yeah, that's something that should be forthcoming.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate the time you've taken to discuss this with us today. Regarding revenue, the revenue received by the city from the courts as a result of automated enforcement systems shall be used exclusively for the following purposes. So we have the two purposes here regarding administrative court costs. So I don't see anything about paying. Is that it would be included in paying the vendor?
So that's a great question. I'm happy you asked it. So think about the way this vendor contract would work is the way we run pretty much every other vendor contract in the city, where you bid, you state what your annual cost for services would be. And if we approve you as the vendor, we say, okay, we agree to pay you this much money Most often it's out of the general fund. Sometimes there are other special funds that are designated for special purposes. But in contrast to the way this ran the last time, where there was a model used where vendors would get a slice of the fee, right? That's not particularly something we're wild about. We don't think it's an appropriate way to run this program. We don't think it's a terribly good incentive. And frankly speaking, we're able to do many of our other contracts as a, you tell us how much money it takes for you to run this, and if we select you, we agree to pay you that much money. So that's how it would work.
And that's item number, city and administrative costs, that would be covered in that.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
But perhaps, I guess it's possible that we're paying for the vendor out of general revenue and this is covering city and administrative costs,
Yeah,
court costs.
so think about, any city costs that would be needed to run this program, for example, time spent doing like the evaluation of the program and those court costs that were referenced earlier. The court's going to take their chunk of the fees first, kick it over to us. If there's any, operational implementation needs, for example, salaries of, the folks at the SLMPD who have to do that final legal sign off before any of those ordinance violation tickets can go out to people, that could be something. But yeah, the costs would be paid otherwise. So yeah, I guess it's possible some of this could go into the city's general fund, but for those specific purposes, for purposes of paying the vendor, it would just be yet another contract that we pay out of a pool of money appropriated to, it would be to the Department of Public Safety and specifically to the Division of the Police within that budget.
And then in the assessment part, you mentioned that the assessment could be considered part of the cost of running the program.
Yeah, if it take, the staff time it would, if that was part of it, if it was a significant need, if they needed to hire a staffer specifically to do that, is but I think by and large, the city administrative costs in this would likely be to mostly the staffing to do, again, the review of the data, the images, those burdens of proof pieces that are necessary in order for that person within the SLMPD to do that final sign off before a ticket would go out to someone, or ordinance violation notice would go out to someone.
Okay. And in the assessment language, it talks about the SLMPD shall compile and provide the director of BPS information regarding the number of things listed that you went through. Again, thank you for being specific in your presentation. This goes to the director of public service, and then they provide it to the board of aldermen. It doesn't mention going to the public, but I guess that would be up to the board. Who at what point does it get posted somewhere? Who can see it?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I don't think there was any intention of this being privately held piece of information. I think that, whether it's provided to the director of the Department of Public Safety or to the board, making that public was certainly contemplated. I defer to the bill sponsor if he welcomes an amendment to clarify that a little bit in some other ways, but the intent is certainly to make information available publicly.
Right. And I think in talking about the number of us in the board who are concerned about making sure that any additional surveillance technology that is put into operation in the city of St. Louis has that transparency piece associated with it, having that laid out in the bill would be really beneficial, I think, to the bill and to people's just trust of the system. It says that the part of the assessment, they will determine whether to install or deploy systems at additional intersections. Would you imagine that would require additional RFPs, or would that just be a contract renegotiation with the vendor, especially since it's not a per ticket? They wouldn't have any incentive necessarily to provide additional work if they're not being paid more. So I'm just kind of interested in what you think that could look like.
Yeah, my inclination would be that as a best practice for contracting, that it would likely be most efficient to bake within the contract. Vendor shall agree to, provide additional cameras, and there could be, some cost negotiation, which
at X price based on market, something written into the bill. And just to clarify, we've talked a number of times about what these cameras could do and what violations they'll issue.
Yes.
These cameras will or will not have any other purpose besides the speed and red light camera or traffic violations. And when we say traffic violations, we keep kind of going back and forth between traffic violation and then red light and then speed. But of course, we know from people who pass us in the oncoming traffic lane that there are
Yeah.
many more traffic violations than just speeding. So
Yep.
any use of these cameras outside of traffic.
Traffic and speed are the two purposes that this is for. And you'll see that the burdens of proof are very specific about the kinds of, the kinds of data that they can pull that have to be provided as part of the ordinance violation note. So it is, sorry, I said traffic and speed, my goodness, red light and speed. Yeah, sorry, red light and speed.
I'm sorry, I'm going to ask again because I guess I got a little lost. Any images that show the alleged traffic violation.
So we use the term traffic violation, and I believe there's a definition in the bill that
Thank you.
specifies that. But when the bill was originally drafted, it was focused on red light camera and not speeding. And so we amended the bill before filing to include traffic violations to be a more broad term that would be inclusive of both red light camera and speeding. But there should be a definition in there that specifies traffic violations as red light and vehicular speeding on page 4.
Okay. I mean, I certainly am interested in traffic violations, meaning more than that, in terms of people passing you into the oncoming lane or driving in the bike lane or any number of things that I think puts our city residents at risk that are outside of those two things. I don't know how that would be tracked though, because they're not being monitored. So we have a red light camera that captures a red light and a person going through it. We have a speeding camera that is picking up a speed. So unless they were being, I guess, monitored.
Correct.
So I'm just
I think,
interested in that.
Alderwoman, it boils down to the technology that's available to us while also going back to like the constitutionality of things.
Right.
So, these are fixed at intersections and they're basically responsive to violations that are spelled out in the, RFP for the technology that's designed for, red light camera and speeding. Other violations that you mentioned, passing someone at an intersection, just off the top of my head, I mean, things that come to mind that would be problematic with that, we don't even stripe our streets. So largely there's areas of South Grand that don't have adequate striping on them for both bike lanes, middle lanes, et cetera. So when you're talking about people passing in other lanes, if they're not clearly delineated, that becomes a problematic, situation with respect to enforcement in general. Obviously we're spending money from ARPA to try and, improve some of those things, but long term, we don't have money in our budget for street striping. So that's, or street striping, that's just a problem in general. So I
guess I wish infrastructure were spelled with an E, because we have engineering, but we don't have striping as striping.
I agree.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely, all of these things work together in order to address a huge problem with so many different pieces to it. None of these things alone are going to solve traffic violence. I think we all know that. Okay, I appreciate those answers and the questions. I do appreciate that clarification, because I do think there's concern in the community with what these cameras could be used for and what they'll be picking up. I know we also have cameras at intersections now that are being used for a variety of things, including tracking individuals, cars involved in crime, all of those things that Chief Tracy explained. So this bill doesn't have anything to do with those, obviously, and those were put up without any legislation from the Board of Aldermen. And they don't currently, yes, and they don't have any oversight by the state, except any violation of, there's no so the state has something to say about how we use cameras for traffic, but they don't have something to say about other uses of cameras to track and get involved folks in crime. I'm just trying to get some clarity around that, if you can.
Do you want to?
So there are regulations at the state and federal level about, surveillance programs, data sharing, data retention, et cetera, that are enumerated in the mayor's executive order that came out recently. And
Right.
then also some of that is addressed in Alderman Rasheen Aldridge's Board Bill 185.
Okay, I just wanted that to be stated for that there are guidelines that are being followed based on state and federal laws, new executive order. I appreciate that. And of course, in the
Locally,
board bill being
however,
considered.
just as a point of
Locally, we don't have an
Locally, we don't
ordinance.
have an ordinance.
Correct. Okay. Thank you so much. I know that's been a lot of questions for folks. I'm sure people will have more. But I know we have many members of the community available for questions. Sorry. Okay. Right now we're doing board bill number 105. So I would like to hear public comments related to 105. If you do have time, if you are here to speak on both board bills, we will extend your time today to 6 minutes, but we will not give you additional time to speak on 106 when we do hear that. So you can choose your own adventure here. If you would like to have 3 minutes on each bill after we've heard Board Bill 106, please stay and we will let you speak again. But if you would like to speak at the same time on both board bills and you're a member of the public who's here for that, just let us know at the beginning and we will give you 6 minutes instead of 3. With that, Madam Clerk, we would like to move, unless you have anything you'd like to say before, great. We would like to move to public comment. If possible, please go back and forth between opposition and support. And I will let you take it from here. Anyone who's speaking, please raise your right hand. The clerk will swear.
Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Mr. Charles Bryson with TrailNet in support. Okay. Liz Kramer in support.
We will just have people at the podium speak. If you have any comments, please save them for your time at the podium. No audio is being picked up in this room unless it's on the microphone. So I think that's important to note. Ms. Kramer, please state your name, zip code for the record, and we will begin with you. And if you're speaking on both bills, let us know so we can start the timer appropriately. Thank you.
Absolutely. My name's Liz Kramer, 63118. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, better. My name is Liz Kramer, 63118. I am speaking on both bills. Hello, thank you so much for all the time today. I'm here to speak in support of Board Bill 105 and 106 on behalf of the Community Accessibility Committee, which is an advisory group made up of residents who are committed to creating a safer, more accessible experience for people getting around St. Louis. We strongly support creating a system of automated enforcement that addresses the most dangerous behaviors on our road, focused on speed cameras and particularly people speeding through red lights. We don't want to see cameras that are addressing felonies, for example. St. Louis is incredibly dangerous, and this type of enforcement can be a bridge while we are awaiting the infrastructure changes that we desperately need that protect the most vulnerable road users. We have a number of conditions, which we've shared with you before, that we would really like to see as part of reauthorizing this program, and I believe Alderman Cohn's substitution will address some of these concerns. First of all, we strongly endorse creating a system of sustainable oversight and regulation of surveillance technology broadly that can be used by the city and by SLMPD. Residents and visitors to the city of St. Louis must have their civil liberties protected, and there needs to be clear, transparent, and accountable structures to let citizens know how and what technology is being used. We don't have that right now. We want to see automated enforcement implemented with structures that ensure that we're making data-driven decisions, particularly ensuring that ticketing does not exacerbate our existing racial disparities and that dangerous locations get safer. That's the point of doing this. We think it's really important that some of the funding is dedicated to public awareness and education about automated enforcement, letting the public know, why does this program exist, what effects does it have, how does it work, how is their privacy protected? We don't think that SLMPD is necessarily the best entity to be delivering that kind of public education. I don't have ideas for you on who is the best entity to do that, but they don't consistently hold the public's trust, and we want to make sure that this is a program that is trustworthy. So we want you to think about who might be better positioned to communicate this program and communicate broader issues about traffic violence. And that should, of course, be done in a way that is concerted, in a well-designed public education effort about reckless driving and culture change in St. Louis. Long term, I think as Alderman Cohn said, we want to see this program generate no fine revenue. In the future, we shouldn't have to be ticketing people for driving because we should have streets that are designed in a way that they don't drive dangerously. We should have a culture where people are not driving dangerously. But at least in the interim, we need to have some reasonable expectations about what administrative costs should be for this program, ensuring that it's run efficiently, the funds are collected and reinvested in communities in the way that is as best as possible. So we really appreciate what's in Board Bill 106, the intention of it around the Neighborhood Traffic Safety Improvement Fund, but we want to make sure that the list of options that's suggested is appropriate and it's helpful, and that it should go beyond what should be covered in our regular maintenance. I know you all are doing lots of other work to have those funds and the asset management. So rather than the list of options included in 106, we strongly recommend using some existing best practices, such as Federal Highway Administration's proven safety countermeasures, or pick up the Americans with Disability Transition Plan, which has recently been approved, and start addressing our critical needs and access across the city. 106 also points to the driver's education program. That program doesn't currently exist, and so we would rather see some of that funding dedicated to something that can address things that are happening right now, including public information campaigns that are designed in ways that help support our new infrastructure and priorities.
That's your time.
Great.
Yeah, did I not do 6 minutes? I did 6 minutes.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Take my own advice with the microphone. If you have any additional comments, you know how to reach us. I did receive the email with the Community Ability Committee's recommendations within the bill, so I appreciate your feedback. Thank you.
John Chasnoff in opposition.
Hi.
Hi, Mr. Chasnoff. Please go
Name's
ahead.
John Chasnoff. My address 7475 Gannon in University City. When I first heard
Excuse me, John, are you speaking of both bills or just the 105?
just on 105.
Okay, thank you.
So when I first heard about this bill, I thought it was a traffic control bill. The fact that it's before this committee and not public safety indicates it's a traffic control bill. The questions that you just asked and the testimony we just heard in response seem to indicate it's a traffic control bill, but I really beg to differ with that. First of all, it doesn't just talk about traffic violations, it talks about ordinance violations in general in probably 5 or 6 different places. Specifically, when you look at the definition of automatic enforcement system, the definition says that this is a system that will work in conjunction with traffic control signals or other methods of activation. So automation is nowhere in the definition except in the title. So there's nothing in the bill that says these are actually going to be automated cameras, and it specifically says that it can be other methods besides traffic control that activates the cameras. So it could be anything that activates these cameras, especially if they're not automated. They could be activated, on the whim of somebody at the Real-Time Crime Center. And I think that's a big problem. Secondly, when you get down to the section on page 10, line 15, that talks about authorized use, it says that this is for violations of city ordinances and state laws, nothing about traffic. So as much as I think the bill wants to be about traffic, and I believe the sponsor intends it to be about traffic, it really has these huge loopholes that could be used to make it about any kind of law enforcement at all. It also states in the bill under prohibitions that there's a prohibition against sharing with surveillance program. But on page 6, line 13, it says specifically that this information is going to the Real-Time Crime Center. The Real-Time Crime Center is the surveillance program for the city. And so running all of these pictures through the Real-Time Crime Center means that, yes, it is indeed being shared with surveillance program. When the administration spokeswoman talked about, we don't want to have pictures taken out and then sent through databases, and this bill won't do that. That's, I think, precisely what it will do. The prohibition is against artificial intelligence, but there's no prohibition against the Real-Time Crime Center taking these pictures, running them through all sorts of databases in effort to determine who the person is. And finally, I just want to point out two problems that I think have to do with the vendors. So it says in one point of the bill, on page 5, line 21, it says that the vendors need to show that they'll be helpful in determining the identity of the people who are driving. And I think that opens us up to a lot of civil liberties concerns. But we don't need private vendors going through databases, government databases looking for the identity of individuals.
That's your time, Mr.
I think we need to
Chasnoff.
specify specifically what their role would be in identifying. And finally, just a glitch in the bill, it says that the vendors have, the authorized persons who are able to access the system are just people from SLMPD. And so there's no way for the vendor to get in and repair the system or work with the system at all.
Thank you for your comments. We did go a little over time there, so if there's anything else you want to say, please send it in writing. You have all of our email addresses, I know. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chasnoff, for coming.
Ms. Taylor March. Mr.
Thank you very much. Taylor March, zip code 63111. And I want to just say thank you off the bat for introducing this bill and for the conversation that's been had already on this. It's really refreshing to finally be at a point when we're discussing this in this format. Thank you again also on your comments on traffic violence being a part of violent crime. I think that's an important distinction that we start to kind of change the dialogue on it. I want to echo the comments made by Liz.
Mr. March, I'm sorry, March. Are you speaking on both bills or just one?
Oh, sorry. Yes, both bills.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. I want to echo Liz Kramer's comments and the Community Mobility's comments on both of these bills as well. And I just support everything that they've already outlined in their letter in the past about this legislation. I come before you kind of speaking from a person who takes the bus, who rides a bike, and who walks regularly, and also a parent who's trying to get my kid to school. I feel like on today's streets right now, I'm choosing between my and my child's safety and my child's long-term future when it comes to climate change. In the past, and I'm scared for my life every day that I bike my child around the city. I'm somebody that has biked regularly in the city of St. Louis for well over a decade, and I'm doing that less and less at a time when it's needed more and more because of the environment in our street. At one point in the past, I know SLMPD, this may not be accurate anymore, only had 3 traffic officers on duty at any given time, and that to me is just not acceptable. On the other hand, I know the racial implications of having more traffic officers in trying to enforce traffic laws, and I also don't want to support more and more policing at this time. So I think this is a great bill to start addressing some of the real concerns around traffic violence, while also not placing more burden on our uniformed traffic officers. I also want to emphasize that I think that the emphasis and the pairing of these two bills is really important. We want to focus on addressing traffic violence, primarily speeding, and then red light running. I've heard a lot of discussion around red light running. There's the history of red lights cameras in the city of St. Louis, but I really think that we'd be doing ourselves a disservice by not focusing on speeding, because speeding is the thing that's really killing people on our streets. I think that it's important that in the launch of this program, we look at both speeding enforcement on the intersection locations as well as corridors, because a lot of our pedestrian crashes are not just at intersections. There where people are trying to cross where there's less movements mid-block. And so I think speeding cameras, specifically along corridors in addition to intersections, and ideally a mobile pilot, so that we're able to move those cameras around, make sure that our enforcement of traffic laws is equitable, and so we can monitor real time what is the disaggregated by race citations that the officers are issuing, and then make sure that that is reflecting our community and isn't exacerbating any disparities that we already see within our policing. I also think that the reporting on citations, we should include, if it's not in the legislation already, a mechanism to be able to see the citations being issued by the cameras separately by the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department, disaggregated by race. This is something that is currently already done within our current traffic enforcement, but I think that for this program to have public trust specifically, it's really important that we're able to move and monitor cameras and make sure that we're not exacerbating what's already occurred in our community. Because of the historic legacy of racial segregation and disinvestment, it's very possible that a program like this, if done equally across our city, could have inequitable results. Because of the streets that we have, many of our streets in historically Black and lower income neighborhoods have less investment in traffic calming infrastructure, and therefore we're more likely to see speeding violations because the built environment doesn't read that this is a place that you can't speed. It reads like it's a highway still, whereas more affluent communities have had the ability to update those places. So I think it's really important that we're able to tailor this program to the results that are coming back. And I thank you for your time and would welcome any questions.
Thank you, Mr. March, for coming.
Ms. Tammy Buford, in opposition.
Thank you. Can you clarify if you're speaking in opposition to both Board Bill 105 and Board Bill 106?
Yes.
You're speaking in opposition to the Neighborhood Traffic Safety Improvement Fund?
Yep.
Okay, you have 6 minutes.
Hi, my name is Tammy Bufford. I'm a resident of 3rd Ward, and I'm an organizer with Action St. Louis and with the DRT campaign. I'm here to testify in opposition to Board Bill 105. This bill for automated traffic enforcement is a poor excuse for public safety, and although in 2015, when the red light cameras were deemed unconstitutional, we're trying to bring them back. The cost of installing red light cameras and our crumbling infrastructure will be a burden on the city, considering that we have so many pressing issues that we need to address, like our crumbling streets, our homeless population, our tenant issues, our health and human services needs. This bill also does not address the root cause to the traffic accidents. Police chases have caused most of the deaths in these traffic incidents, but we're not addressing that in this. This bill is just another police surveillance technology that is unaccountable to the public, and it will have punitive damages to the Black and brown people in our community because the placement of the cameras are disproportionately placed in Black and brown neighborhoods where people cannot afford the fines and fees associated with these tickets. The red light camera technology will not prevent accidents from happening. It will actually cause more accidents because people are stopping abruptly and will cause more rear-end collisions than we're currently having. Instead of reactivating technology that's unconstitutional, we should move traffic enforcement from the police and put it into a non-carceral department that can address the root cause of the problem. I'm asking everybody to please vote no on this bill because it will not help our community.
Thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
Mr. Charles Bryson, in support.
In support. Oh, there it is.
Of both bills or just 105?
In support of both.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you.
So, I did that already. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Charles Bryson, Policy Catalyst for TrailNet, the regional nonprofit organization advocating for safe streets for all. We wish to thank board sponsors Shane Cohn and board president Megan Green for bringing this much-needed legislation to the board. The lack of officers, especially traffic enforcement officers, combined with the amount of speeding and destructive driving, has made automated enforcement a critical piece of an overall discussion on how to make our streets safer for all users. However, all three of what TrailNet would call companion bills, Board Bill 105, Board Bill 106, and Board Bill 185, require several things. First, we ask for the board to conduct strong and continual oversight by putting meaningful reporting tools, such as regular reporting to the board and regular website updates from the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department in each of the bills, and stick to them. Second, look to where residents can fit into the policy-making and practice determinations. When it states St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department will create policies, invite the police to your ward or neighborhood meeting to discuss such concepts before having them finalized and implementing them. Both of these two ideas may create an environment of transparency, something that we would argue is lacking right now. Third, please let's try and make sure St. Louis is not an island into itself. Many municipalities in the region are using same or similar types of technology. Using something completely different may not be in the best interest of the city nor the region. And as you have heard, these types of issues are region-wide, not just directly to the city. So we look at the region as a whole while we're selecting vendors for automated enforcement. And to Board Bill 106, first, please add quick build to the definition and implementation section and mandate they be used when possible. The city has not allowed quick build solutions without strong aldermanic intervention. Thank you, Alderman Cohn. This both philosophy and practice must change. People might still be alive or not have been seriously injured if quick build solutions were able to be put in place. Several streets could have become much safer with quick build traffic calming measures, streets such as Page, Chippewa, and a few others. Also, there are very narrow examples for the use of these funds. Could be a hindrance to traffic calming and therefore the reduction in speeding and destructive driving. Please add the use of Federal Highway Administration or National Association of City Transportation Officials as part of the process. Finally, one wonders, with ARPA funds needing to be spent and ward capital also allocated, number one, how will the Neighborhood Transportation Safety Fund will or can it be spent? And in what order will it be spent over others? Also, how will projects be determined? And how will equitable spending be done? Will it be the corridors or intersections of the most car crashes or fatalities that will be selected? Will the money be rolled over until it accumulates a sufficient amount of? Will it use to increase the lighting or sidewalk or some other strategy? I believe, and TrailNet believes, it is important that these answers or answers to some of these questions be spelled out in the legislation, if nothing more than for transparency's sake. I wish to thank this committee and all the members thereof, and will entertain any questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bryson, for coming.
Inez Bardo. In opposition.
Thank you. Are you opposed to both 105 and 106?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. You have 6 minutes.
Hi, my name is Inez Bordeaux. I'm the Deputy Director of Community Collaborations at Arch City Defenders. I'm an organizer with the DRT campaign, and for full transparency, I'm the committee woman of the 3rd Ward. So I am opposed to this bill for a multitude of reasons. One, we shouldn't even be having a discussion about red light cameras until we pass CCOPS. So everyone on the committee who is gonna vote for this, I hope to see your affirmative vote for CCOPS also when we have that hearing tomorrow. Also, I don't understand how you all think this bill is enforceable. I'm not a lawyer, but if you cannot ticket someone, you can't ticket the car, and you're not allowed to use facial recognition or AI, I just don't understand how this is enforceable, and we could be using our time to be creating like true public safety, traffic safety. I want to know specifically, how is this bill going to prevent traffic deaths? Like, at best, this bill is reactive. At worst, it's just more criminalization in St. Louis, which we don't need. I have concerns about enforcement. If you get a red light camera ticket, like, is a warrant issued if you don't pay the fine? If a warrant is issued, why are we contributing to the continued mass incarceration problem that we have in St. Louis? And if you don't get a warrant, what are we doing? If there's no enforcement, why are we doing this? And also, there's not enough police oversight. The police are not in a position and should not be in a position to be the ones checking themselves around the surveillance technology that is being used. We know for a fact that we don't know anything about the Real-Time Crime Center. You all don't know anything about the Real-Time Crime Center because the police that are supposed to issue an annual report about it hasn't done it in 5 years. So with that being said, with all of the already unchecked surveillance that is happening in St. Louis, we know that this bill will have a disproportionate impact on Black and brown people. We know that because we just saw the leaked documents from ShotSpotter and found out that all of these microphones and cameras are disproportionate in Black and brown neighborhoods. And I want to use my last few seconds to highlight something that Chief Tracy said. He said last year SLMPD had 78 accidents. We know that at least 22 of those accidents were caused by the police engaging in high-speed chases. We know that there are lots of families who have lost family members due to the reckless driving of the police department. And lastly, I just want to say, y'all, we have to stop doing this thing where we continue to try to criminalize everything as the solution for the problems. The DRT campaign, last year, we watched a very funny video from John Oliver where in Bolivia, to deal with their traffic enforcement and traffic issues, they created a traffic zebra program where people dressed up like zebras, and they went out and they educated people on the importance of driving safely and speed limits, and did a whole education program and would be literally out in the streets to encourage people to slow down, to use their signals, so on and so forth. And the program worked. It went from 12 people dressed up like zebras helping with traffic to over 200 people that are employed by the government to go out and help with traffic safety. And that did not include any criminalization. Nobody was getting tickets. They didn't put up surveillance and cameras. So I am saying we can do better. We can do better by this. Alder Cohn knows I love him dearly, but we can do better than this. We don't have to resort to going back to criminalization and zombie bills that we already defeated 10 years ago. Let's do better. And also come to the DRT campaign. We have a monthly movement meeting. We meet next Thursday at Deaconess from 6 to 8. Our members have 1,000 ideas about how to create better traffic enforcement and traffic safety without expanding the scope, power, and reach of the police department, without criminalizing our communities, and it has the added benefit of making us safer. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming, sharing those thoughts.
Our last speaker, Rachel Hurtado, in opposition.
To both bills, yes. But I'm Bolivian and I'm very pro-traffic zebras. Okay, so my name is Rachel Hurtado. I live in Ward 7. I work downtown. And I'm testifying in strong opposition to both of these bills because increasing automated surveillance in our city is not the right or effective approach to improving traffic safety. An automated red light camera system will increase the criminalization of poor, working class Black residents and is ultimately a reactive and uncreative approach. I want to raise that although the bill mentions several times that this system will not be used for the electronic surveillance of the residents, the automated camera system is, in and of itself, a surveillance technology. And more importantly, the red light camera footage and data will be passed along to and processed by the Real Crime Center, which is the city's surveillance hub for the residents. The bill language about not using this camera for surveillance purposes exists to appease residents like me who are concerned about police surveillance, but it does not actually substantively prevent this tech from being used for surveillance in our city. This bill only bans the use of facial recognition software for the camera system as owned and operated by the vendor. It does not ban the use of facial recognition software by SLMPD or the Real Crime Center. So once the data, the footage captured by the cameras is passed to the RTCC, there's nothing preventing them from using facial recognition software or AI to evaluate that data. Even if RTCC doesn't use AI technology right now, there's nothing preventing them from using that software tomorrow. And this legislation doesn't include anything regulating or preventing the use of facial recognition software and AI technology by the Real-Time Crime Center. This bill also says that the vendor may assist in determining the identity of the drivers. I'd like to know exactly what technology the vendor uses to do that without facial recognition software or AI. I'd also like to know what is the estimated cost to maintain this camera surveillance system. The bill says that the revenue generated will be used first to fund the continued maintenance of that camera system. So it's possible that very little revenue is left over for the fund outlined in Board Bill 106. Again, deprioritizing public infrastructure that big and small city residents have been demanding for decades. My car was totaled in November of last year in the city by a driver who didn't stop when and where they were supposed to. And the year before, I was T-boned by a car who was running a red light in a chase. As a city resident who's been directly impacted by reckless driving in the city, I urge this committee to not pass Board Bill 105 and to instead invest this funding in long-term solutions that don't use racist technology to criminalize Black and poor people in St. Louis. We want road diets and calming, more narrow roads, continental and mid-block crosswalks that are ADA accessible. We want infrastructure investment prioritized on the front end with this funding, not whatever is left over after we continue to pay for the red light camera system. We want to see reckless driving by the SLMPD meaningfully addressed, including traffic violence from high-speed chases and the numerous police vehicle crashes. The current bill language and the evaluation process for where to place these cameras is extremely vague, again, using buzzwords to appease residents like me who are concerned about police surveillance without meaningful enforcement of that bill language. We want traffic enforcement to be moved out of the police department. It may be a longer road, but long-term investment in our city's infrastructure will pay dividends for traffic and pedestrian safety here. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone who took the time out of your very busy lives to come in and speak on the bill. A lot that I have questions about from the comments that were made, so I appreciate that a lot. At this time, are there members of the committee that have questions for any of the members of the public who spoke? Okay. And I know you were not planning on asking for a vote today on these bills. There's many things that need to be addressed. So, but at this time, Alderman Cohn, you're recognized to close the conversation on 105, so we can move to 106.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At this point, you're correct. I'm not planning on asking for a vote for Board Bill 105. As I mentioned earlier, I'm working on a committee substitute that addresses, many of the concerns that have been brought up here today, maybe a few others, but at the same time, looking forward to working with Alderman Aldridge on Board Bill 185 in terms of surveillance oversight. And then, 106 as well, or you just said close out on 105?
I still think there's a lot of conversation to be had about 106. I do go deeper into the point by point of it today, or if you're looking to close the conversation for now and reopen it. We have a few more mini meetings before the end of session.
I would be fine with continuing it at another committee hearing. I know some of us have to go to the African American Black History Month celebration that's happening in the Rotunda in a few minutes here as well. So I'm fine continuing the conversation on 106 and diving in deeper on that in particular as well. And as I mentioned earlier, there are amendments that I'm already working on for 106.
Okay, thank you for presenting today. We will hold a vote at a later time and hear these bills again in committee. We'll make sure that that is noticed properly, so anyone who would like to participate in the conversation is able to do so. We will, of course, take more public comment when the bills are back in front of this committee. Moving on in the agenda, we do not have any resolutions to review, no committee discussions, acknowledgement of written testimony.
We have none.
We have not written testimony, okay. Any announcements? I know we will have more to hear more on both of these bills in the future. We will be discussing a Vision Zero resolution that will be filed, that will be in front of us on Friday, and then we'll have that hearing next week, which is the goal of 0 traffic deaths in our city. Excused members, I would like to excuse Alderman Vollmer for necessary absence. And I will now entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Hearing no objection to previous roll, we have adjourned. Thank you so much.